Hello, my name is Christina Daly, and I work at the Office of Community Colleges and Workforce Development. Welcome to Navigate and Learn the Labor Market and Career Resources on Qualityinfo.org webinar. Today's webinar will be recorded and added to the Academic and Program Approval webpage with a link sent to each college's curriculum office. We have allotted 60 minutes, 45 minutes for the presentation, and 15 minutes for Q&A. Questions are welcomed. Please write down and be prepared to ask during the Q&A portion. I am delighted to introduce our speaker, Jason Payton. Jason is currently an occupational economist and has worked with the Oregon Employment Department's Research Division for the past 14 years. Welcome, Jason. We look forward to your presentation.
Well, thank you so much, Christina, and thank you all for joining today. It's a very warm afternoon here in Oregon, so I appreciate anybody. Certainly, if you don't have air conditioning at home, that's a bit of a challenge these days. Again, my name is Jason Payton. I've worked with the Workforce and Economic Research Division for about 14 years, and some of the primary activities I work on today focus mainly around occupational employment information, some of the resources that you find on the occupational profiles tool of our website, qualityinfo.org, and also help coordinate the publication of the Oregon Careers magazine each year, if you've seen that, heading out to various schools, high schools, and workforce partners. We'll start off just giving a little bit of context to the information that we'll be covering today in our occupational profiles tool and some of the business explorer tools, because I think in the end, I can share hundreds of different numbers to you, but I think without context and understanding how they fit into Oregon's situation right now, it's kind of hard to really put some weight into the value or relevancy of the information that you see. So I'll get this presentation shared here, and we'll jump to our website here shortly. Can everybody see that okay? Oh, good. All right. Click on the right button here. So just a little more context of qualityinfo.org and how it fits into the Oregon Employment Department's mission. As many of you know, the Oregon Employment Department administers the state's unemployment insurance system. We'll also be administering the upcoming paid leave programs here in the state. The agency also supports workforce development through various field offices and partnerships with our WorkSource offices around the state. And we also have administrative hearings. That means we're an independent body that provides essentially legal adjudication for individuals that are having difficulties with various state agencies dealing with administrative matters. And through the Workforce Innovation Opportunity Act and a Workforce Information Grant, we also have the Workforce and Economic Research Division. That's the group of folks and researchers that I'm tied to. The Research Division has the mission of providing Oregon and Oregon's population quality labor market information so that they can make informed decisions. And that essentially is the crux of what we are trying to do with our website, qualityinfo.org, and the various tools that we'll be talking about today. We do that through a number of different acts effectively, including conducting original research as contracted by the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics. We conduct a number of different business, occupational, employment surveys that head out to thousands of businesses each year so we can get some fundamental economic and labor market information to aggregate and describe a narrative of what's going on here in the state. We also provide a clearinghouse of that information. That's our website, qualityinfo.org. That's that primary resource. And when we talk about, what the state sort of considers sort of the official labor market information numbers, it's qualityinfo.org that is providing sort of that baseline set of information. And our resources and the estimates that come out of the Workforce and Economic Research Division, as well as national partners like the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics, are used by numerous third-party contractors and third parties to develop additional resources and tools that various education institutions use across the state and across the country. We also provide a regional subject matter expertise. So that means that we have staff dedicated to understanding the nuance and the story of local areas, because those can be fundamentally different to what's going on as a state as a whole. So much of our statewide narrative can be dominated by the Portland metro area, understandably because of the population and the overall presence of economic activity. And the nuanced story of what's going on in our coastal communities, our rural communities that rely on forest products or manufacturing, or in the eastern portion of our state, is necessarily muddled if we include the story of what's going on in Portland. And it's these subject matter experts in the regional areas, our workforce analysts and our regional economists, that provide that sort of subject matter expertise to understand what's going on in the local communities. And I'll hit back on those regional folks here in just a little bit later on. When it comes to working with higher education, I wanted to highlight our role and our partnership in not only the collection and providing information to policymakers and folks trying to make decisions such as yourselves, but also in partnering with Oregon's higher education system to provide necessary information to job seekers and students entering the post-secondary world, entering the workforce for the first time. We do this through partnerships that develop the Oregon Careers magazine and a number of other down the stream products. We develop customized analysis, essentially using these national derived programs like our occupational employment projections and our Oregon wage information, to narrow down the focus and understand the characteristics of that information through the lens of what's considered important by many policymakers. And so we work with various state agencies, including the Higher Education Coordinating Commission, the Oregon STEM Council, the Oregon Department of Education, and the Oregon's Workforce Talent and Development Board, to come up with shared terminologies, shared definitions of what's in demand. What's a high wage job? What's a high demand job necessarily in the state? And finally, something that we'll highlight towards the end is we work with various partners in higher ed to coalesce administrative information so that we can have fundamental summaries of how individuals going through various workforce and education programs in the state are doing once they've exited those programs. One of the ways in which we do this is through our PRISM program found on qualityinfo.org. But I also will highlight a recently released data set that is housed at the U.S. Census Bureau. And it's through a partnership of the Oregon Employment Department, the Higher Education Coordinating Commission, and the Oregon's public schools, and the U.S. Census Bureau, that allows us to develop new resources and ways to look at this information to perhaps have a better understanding of how students are doing once they actually exit programs across the state. So when we look at the information on Qualityinfo through these occupational profile tools, the labor market information that you use to fulfill the standard A requirements and describing the need, it helps to put that into context of how the various occupations compare with our statewide numbers. Over the next 10 years, essentially looking back from 2020 to 2030, our current long-term projections say that Oregon's workforce is projected to grow roughly 16%, about a little more than 300,000 jobs over the next 10 years. And that growth is not going to be the same from one sector to the other. Based off of labor force dynamics, the ability to find skilled and educated workers, our projected growth is going to be a little bit different in various sectors. Construction is going to be driven by residential demand. And so, for instance, if we see continued increases in things like the federal funds rate and the interest rates continue to go up, maybe we'll see the housing market settle down a little bit. For areas like manufacturing, We know that things like technological advancement and productivity gains, the ability of an individual to make more than they used to in the past, means that even if we have an increased demand for the goods that our manufacturers and our Oregon businesses produce, it may not be the case that employment is going to grow at the same cadence, the same rate of those products and the demand therein. Along those same lines, we know that long-term population dynamics, an aging workforce, and the need for advanced medical treatments is going to spur on the demand for healthcare services, whether it's in physicians' offices, hospitals, or other settings. And so we have to understand that that growth is going to be a little bit different across different sectors. From a needs standpoint, and why some of the numbers that you're pulling from our occupational profiles it can be either so different from growth rates or the overall narrative as a whole in terms of what occupations are in need, is that we have to understand that growth is only a small portion of what needs to be filled in by our workforce development and education system as a state. For every one job that we project due to the growth of a business, the expansion of construction and healthcare or some other sector in the state, we generally protect 7 or 8 job openings due to what we call replacement openings. These are openings caused by folks changing careers. Perhaps that barista just graduated and they have to leave that food and beverage service career to become an accountant or an engineer or some other career, and as a result, that creates an opening. We also have an aging population. There are folks that are getting to a certain age where punching that card might be something that they're not interested into anymore, and they have the nest egg able to set sail and head off into the Puget Sound, sail off to the San Juans. We have to account for those folks. And that's where these replacement openings are so important to understand that even in sectors like manufacturing, where we might see relatively lower growth than the state as a whole, the overall need for openings and the filling of those job openings over the next 10 years is still absolutely there. The education requirements of our job openings is going to be varied quite a bit. Many entry-level jobs have really high turnover rates. And so sometimes when I give these presentations to policymakers that are shocked to see that the vast majority of our projected job openings come from jobs that have a typical entry-level education of a high school degree or less. But the reality is that much of that story is being driven by things like entry-level jobs in food and beverage services and regional hospitality, retail. These are areas where people can enter into those jobs coming out of high school or even without a high school degree pretty easily. And they also have really high turnover. And so by the very nature of these careers, they generally drive the job openings. And so that's one of the underpinning stories as to why we see such a variance here. The other thing I'd highlight is that even though only about a third of the job openings that we project are in careers that require typical entry-level education, that requires some form of post-secondary education, that's still over 700,000 jobs over the next 10 years. And so that's a pretty good sized number. That's a big chunk to chew on effectively for our post-secondary and workforce development system. So before we get into some of the occupational profiles, I just wanted to hit on a few headline items. Some of the terms that we have and we talk about when it comes to workforce development are things like high demand jobs and high wage jobs. And the way in which those particular definitions are developed means that about half of the occupations that we collect information for usually fit into these criteria or not. That doesn't mean they account for half of the jobs. It just means that they account for half of the types of jobs. Out of the 800 that we collect information for, about 350 to 400 usually fit into that definition. And as such, for something like the high demand occupations where we talk about things like retail and things like food service, they end up accounting for the vast majority of total job openings in the state, roughly 2.4 million job openings over the next 10 years. But for something like a high wage job, it's about 900,000 job openings. So not quite half of the job openings are considered to be in careers that qualify, at least in our definition of high wage. Along those same lines, there are a lot of programs that focus in on STEM careers. We have roughly 280 different careers that meet that STEM definition from the Brookings Institute. And our current projection is that about 431,000 job openings are projected in careers that meet that Brookings definition of STEM jobs. So those are some of the headline items that I just want to leave out there in the air, just so that when we delve into the occupational profiles or some of the resources, you have some context of how they compare to the statewide rate, but also the magnitude of the need that we're seeing out there in the workforce. So I'm going to close this presentation real quick and head to qualityinfo.org. All right. So our website actually is in the process of being redeployed. We are actually redesigning the website to some extent. Most of the resources that we're talking about today won't change. They're getting a classy new layer of paint effectively coming out here later this fall. So I don't have a particular date and time. Our systems folks are hard at trying to get this new website deployed, but I just want to give you a heads up that if the website or the occupational profile looks substantially different from appearance, that's because we are working on it. And along those same lines, the underlying information is still going to be there. That's not going to change, at least in the short run. The main focus for the standard A and occupational profile analysis comes from our occupational profiles tool. In order to get there, we need to look at jobs and careers in our menu bar and head down to our occupational wage information. And the occupational profile tool is a collection of data and resources from multiple state and federal agencies, all pulled together into a one-stop location. We want to avoid having you or our job seekers or a high school student going to 9 different tools or 9 different resources to get summary information about a career. We know that that just makes that much more of a deterrent for anybody to use the information and make informed decisions using that information. The profile is designed so that you can just basically pull all the information that we have available, or you can customize it. In order to customize reports, you can select or deselect various categories of information. And based off of the request, we can pull the information for the state as well as various workforce areas. One of the things I want to key in on is that our geographies, when we talk about information, are going to look a little bit different than community college districts and the areas that colleges focus in on. That's by design in terms of federal prioritization and where the funding is coming from. The resources that pay for us to be able to do this work are focused in around the workforce development system and our workforce boards, which means that the resources produce data and projections and wage estimates for the workforce areas. And then if we can do anything on the after the fact, then we try to support other areas and geographies where we can. But for our website, the workforce investment areas, 9 major areas as well as sub areas in Central and Eastern Oregon are the way in which information is presented on the website. Using that geography, you can select various areas. You'll see the similar title, Central Oregon, Clackamas. Any geography that we're going to have information for is going to be listed here, as well as the counties that are contained therein. Obviously, things like a term like Eastern 6 isn't going to be intuitive for everybody using information from Eastern Oregon, but effectively it's everything east of the Cascades other than Marl and Umatilla counties. But to clarify what that is, the counties are listed here in full detail. One of the things that I'll highlight here, because I saw Drew's from Clackamas Community College, is that correct? Is that
Hi, all. We're going to give Jason a second to come back on as he froze. It looks like he went ahead and hopped off so he can come back on. Technology is a wonderful thing, isn't it?
It's a blessing and a curse.
Hopefully everybody's coming up with some great questions that we can ask him at the end while we have his ear. And it looks like Jason is back. Welcome back, Jason.
Thank you. I apparently the air conditioning has not been sufficient for the computer. It's very cranky. All right. Sorry about that, everybody. Casina, where did I break out from the?
We were just on quality info on the occupational profile reports, and you're talking about Clackamas and Drew. Clackamas Community College has kind of their own little area.
Yeah. The wage information that we have for Oregon wage information, our wage percentiles, are available for Clackamas County. For the occupational employment projections, you'd want to look at the Portland Tri-County area as a whole, because that Tri-County area is what we have information for. So it just want to make sure that you're aware of it. So when we get into something like Clackamas County and it's not there, there's a very particular reason for that. All right, so let's say, for instance, we were talking to local businesses, maybe a couple of machine shops, and they said, I had interest in developing a CNC operator and CNC training program. We can type into the occupational profile tool CNC, and a number of different occupations that may fit that criteria will pop up. We can see that technically there's CNC operators, but we also have the folks that could actually be programming those CNC tools. Slightly different skill sets, slightly different job duties. So we try to track information from both of those particular careers and breakdowns. We have the description and definition. These definitions come from the Standard Occupational Classification System. It's the federal list of occupations, about 840 that we have information for, so that if you're using our resources, the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics, the Occupation Information Network, or even data from the U.S. Department of Education's National Center of Education Statistics, we're all using the same nomenclature and the same occupation codes. Down here, I don't believe it's necessary for the data report, and Christina, you can clarify for this for me, but the job openings listing is not necessarily important for the standard A need report. Is that still correct?
That is correct. It's not necessarily required. However, it is a very promising practice to showcase your need, the current live need in the area.
That's a great great point, because effectively what we're showing here is any job posting that has gone through the National Labor Exchange, the Oregon Employment Department, and we also try to scrape job postings from various online job boards from a service we get from Burning Glass. So there are numerous different sources trying to get an idea of current workforce need, and this is one way of sort of trying to express that and display that information. So that information is outright in the front. If we have state administered licenses, essentially through state boards and agencies, we try to link that to our various occupations. I think right now there's roughly 350 or 400 different state licenses administered by state agencies or boards that we have information for. If we have that from the Secretary of State's office, we post that information here. There are some circumstances where if you're working in, for instance, chemical, alcohol, and drug abuse counseling, there's a nationally accredited certification, and because the state doesn't administer it, it's a nationally administered certification. We don't have it listed in things like counselor or social worker, but it's very common the case that social service assistants and various counselors will still require that type of licensing. So it's good to be aware of what we're trying to describe here is state administered licenses, as opposed to things like nationally accredited or sort of specific skill licensing like Microsoft certification or something like that. The wage information comes to us from a national survey that we conduct on behalf of the Bureau of Labor Statistics. It's an annual survey that heads out to thousands of businesses, and over about 3 years, we pool information together to come up with wage estimates. That includes by state, by occupation, by workforce area, and we try to develop average wages, annual wages, and percentiles. And so that's the way in which this information is presented. If it's available locally, you can filter down for a particular area in the state. Let's say, for instance, Lane County. And we can try and pull that information up. Take a second to load up. But you can see there we have the ability to compare, and this is similar to that occupation supplemental report, where you have an Oregon summary wage as well as a local area wage estimate. So we have ranges from 10th to 90th percentiles, and average hourly wage and average hourly wage and average annual wage. The annual wage, just as a frame of reference, is assuming that a worker is actually working full time. So generally it's about 2,080 hours. And so doing quick math, generally you'll see that the average hourly rate times 2,080 gets us to the annual rate, plus or minus a few cents. And if you're working on the supplemental report, generally that would be if you're trying to make comparable numbers to what you see on our website, it's taking that hourly wage and multiplying it by 2,080 to get that annual wage. The
Jason,
other, yes.
quick question. Can we go back to the above?
Oh, yes.
So you just live in the thing. So my area does not have, let's say the lane says not available, that the wage information is not available. How do the colleges calculate, because we still require for the need that these boxes are filled out, these columns, the 10th percentile, 25th percentile, 50th, 75th, 90th, and average hourly, average annually. How would they calculate? How do you calculate that information?
Sure, great question, Christina. Let's pull up a quick example here of what might happen in this scenario where basically we have a gap in the information. As the current process stands, one of the things that you're looking for to supplement is reaching out and contacting businesses that might be benefiting from this training program, collecting general information about their workforce. So one of the things that we try to do, just to give you an example of how we're collecting this information, is we ask employers to report out how many workers they have in different occupations and to break that into some level of detail where we understand the wages that are being paid. So here, for instance, if we had 3 businesses reporting information to us for CNC operator, we would have them tell us for each wage group effectively that they're paying out, because obviously you're going to have some type of pay scale for experienced entry-level workers and folks that might be taking on more complex responsibilities within that particular job and job title. And so they're going to get paid different rates. And so we want to first get an idea of what those rates are, and for each rate, how many workers are being paid that rate. Once we have that information from whatever businesses that we're collecting information for, in order to calculate a percentile, we have to sort effectively, because what we're trying to describe is a percentile range. So when we say 10th percentile, we're saying that for all the wages that were reported to us and the various methods that we're filling in the gaps for, we're trying to identify 10% of the workers, what their wage is, and what the wage is above that 10% point and what that wage is below. So let's say, for instance, out of those 3 businesses that I just showed, they reported the number of workers they had for each wage area, and we pulled this information together. We would then sort the information from low wage to high wage, basically saying this is the bottom of my wage range and the top of my wage range. And depending on the survey, sometimes we'll actually do this by hours. Sometimes we'll do this by employment, or some combination therein. But in most cases, when you're talking with a business, employment is kind of the baseline of what they understand and the easiest point of reference to get information for. And so we see that here in this case, these three imaginary businesses had 100 workers. And the three businesses paid everything from $18 an hour to $70 an hour. In order to identify the percentiles effectively, what we need to do is identify the number of workers out of 100 in this case that would be my 10th percentile. So this is a pretty straightforward example. So the 10th percentile would be, what will be the wage range of my 10th worker if I were to sort from lowest to highest. 25th percentile would be my 25th worker, 50th percentile, 75th would be 75, 90th percentile would be 90. So in effect, I'm sorting the number of the information that I have and using the employment to identify how many workers are above and below that, and then picking out what that percentage would be. So in this example, we've sorted everything out. And there are a couple of different ways to do this, but just highlighting the cells here, I'm looking for the wage range for the 10th worker. If I work my way up my wage list, I can see that effectively somewhere around this bucket of $23 an hour is my 10th worker. So that means that my 10th percentile, in terms of how I would report it, will be $23 an hour. Along the same lines, my 25th percentile, so my 25th worker, is making around $27 an hour. Medians coming in at 35. For my 75th percentile, it's actually in the same wage area. That can happen in some cases, especially if we have a congregation. A great example of this is that if we look at educators and the way in which educators are paid, there's a very specific spectrum of wages depending on the district of what their salaries are going to be. So there's a concentration that we typically see. And then we see an outlier here beyond the 90th percentile, well above that $70. So if I was reporting out those top down 10th to 90th percentiles, I'd be reporting out 23, 27, 35, 35, 42. And that gets us that percentile wage range that we're looking at. So percentiles, as complex as it sounds, is really basically a sort. We're just trying to understand and map out our distribution of wages. Does that make sense?
I was wondering if you think that there is a minimum number of workers needed to put in this sort to have it be meaningful.
That would be that's a good question. I probably have to defer to Cassina in terms of what the sort of state expectation is on that, because it really comes down to how many businesses you're talking to, how big that business is going to be. For us, what's going on in the background for our occupational employment wage statistics program, our business survey, is we're trying to we look at wages based off of generally how much of the story we're getting. So if I'm talking to one business and I know that there are 150 other businesses, I'm probably not getting the whole story. If I'm talking to a manufacturer that represents 80% of wood products manufacturing in Douglas County, that might be a different story, right? So I think the source of the information is as important as the number itself. Cassina, do you have any guidance or expectation in terms of what you would expect to see?
Jason, I think this is a wonderful question that Susan has asked us, and I think that it's going to be a very asked question across this. I would like to respectfully request that we add this to the FAQ and that we talk about, you and I talk about this more offline, and to articulate it in a way that will be understood across the field, and that we feel really can accurately tell the story.
Can I ask a question real quick about this? So are we a lot of the times we have missing information. In Clackamas, we have missing wage information. I would say probably, I don't know, maybe 2% of the time everything is filled out. So most of the time we have missing info. And we leave it up to our departments to provide us this information. They're not calling employers and surveying 100 employees to get this info. I'm pretty sure that's not happening. So is that the preferred method, that they need to survey a group of employers to get this info, or are there other resources that are available for them? I mean, I know they work with advisory committees and stuff like that, but that's different than what's being asked for here, I think.
Drew, I think in the case of Clackamas Community College, as I learn as well, as we're learning together, because I'm going to be the first to admit here that I learned something new, and that is that Clackamas using the Tri-County information instead of just the Clackamas is the better way to go, because it's I think you're going to get a lot more, going to see a lot less missing information if you get a Tri-County, and you guys are really part of Tri-County. And so I would encourage you to go that way. And as far as your other question for how to come up with this information, I asked today that Jason show us how they come up with the information, so we have a better idea of a way that we can also do it. But historically, we've always asked that it's the employer advisory committee that come up with that information, because they're the ones that are telling us, the community colleges or the CCWD, that they need us to teach this certificate. They need to teach us courses in the certificate, because they're seeing they have a huge need for it in the area. So I think it's really upon them to let us know that, hey, we're going to see a hiring of X amount of people, and these are our wages that we're going to find. And then us looking at that data and seeing how we put together the 10th, the 25th, 50th, 75th, 90th, average hourly, average annual, to the best of our ability. It may not be perfect, but we're going to be able to tell a story for our area.
Okay, I think that's good. That makes me feel better. Thanks.
Just before I move on to the outlook statements, because I know that's also an important section, the supplemental reports and some of the information that the state is looking at. Does anybody else have questions coming up about wage information, or where our wage estimates are coming from?
Yes,
I guess
I
go ahead.
I just have a quick question, sorry, around how you would do this for emerging industries. We're dealing a lot with emerging jobs and emerging industries that might not have the data that's caught up with them yet. And I'm wondering if you had any tips or advice on how to paint that data.
You know, that's a great question, Susan. And the challenge for us is that most of not only the information we have available to us, but also literally the definitions that we are usually using to describe it are very old. And what I mean by that is that, for instance, the occupation definitions that we're currently using date back to, I think, 2014. So if I was trying to talk to somebody about the innovation of information technology and the emergence of software development, I think the story would be very different, you know, of what terminology, what job titles I'd be talking about 10 years ago than it is today. And so that is always a challenge with emerging occupations. I think a great example that sometimes historically, for instance, I think Central Oregon Community College deals with, you know, pilot licensing, right, and various aircraft related careers, and you know, talking about drone pilots and the emergence of using you know, drone technology in all kinds of professional, scientific, and commercial venues is something of interest. It's something that we're not quite sure where it's landing, both in terms of tracking and narratively. So I would say that whatever information you have from the businesses themselves are probably going to be a whole lot more informative when it comes to emerging trends than what you're going to find with our occupational projections or our wage information. The reason I say that is one of the core principles that our projection as economists actually uses when looking at long-term trends is that we do not take into consideration essentially the expectation or sometimes aspiration of an industry to expand dramatically. So what I mean by that is that we basically wait for, if you're driving down I-5 right now and a very large wholesale distributor is building something next to Woodburn, we wait for that building to get built before we start assuming that a few thousand, fulfillment employees will be distributing in various blue vans across the state, right? So we don't make that assertion just because so many things can happen in manufacturing or commercial enterprises. Say a business is going to happen. My economic development folks tell me this is happening, and 5 years later, there's nothing there except an open lot, and it's going to happen. That's great, but we can't make that assumption. We don't want to, and so we take very conservative strides as to where our growth is going to be. A good example of that is in Lane County, for instance, Archimoto. We'll see how they go through the economic cycle here, but that is a sector that is still, essentially developing. So to say that, automobile manufacturing of that type is going to be expanding significantly in Lane County is still hard to say at this point. And so generally, when we talk about our regional economists, those subject matter experts that we have in the area, they generally are very conservative when it comes to emerging careers or emerging industries and opportunities.
Jason, I'm going to jump in here for a second, if that's all right. Susan, regarding emergent occupations, this is another area where we rely heavily on our employer advisory boards. It's really important that if an employer comes to us and saying, hey, we have these certificates or these degrees that we want you to teach, that they participate and work with us to better understand how this is going to affect us or affect our region and to show our need. Because again, hopefully the college wants them to, the employers to show them the need before you start putting the money into developing the certificates or degrees. And so that's really where we're relying on those employee advisory boards to say, okay, this is new. We don't have any previous data on this. So we want to show the state that you guys do have the foundation, the careers that are going to be opening, the living wages that we need to be able to produce or teach the certificates to give our students the opportunity to come work for you. Does that make sense, Susan?
Yes, and can I just ask a follow-up question on that? I have a specific case that may actually touch on quite a few of us here. The governor came out with a report about the state of addiction in Oregon.
Mm-hmm.
And so really looking at what's needed to change what's going on in the state of Oregon around substance addiction. There are a number of employers in the state of Oregon who, based on what we're hearing, don't have the resources, don't have the funding, don't have the personnel to be able to make the changes that are in the report. And if we're looking at trying to create the education that can make that change in the report, we don't necessarily have at this moment in time employer support to be able to do it because they're underwater just trying to keep afloat in this horrible problem that we have in the state of Oregon right now. So if you're saying that employer advisory board support is most important, that story for this particular issue may not be painted in that way right now.
So I think, Susan, that this is a really great question. I think it's something that needs to be further explored, and maybe something good that we can touch base outside of this webinar on, since that is an area that it is one of the governor's new pushes. And so for the sake of timing, I'd like to respectfully ask you if we could discuss that outside of this. Or maybe we
Certainly.
can all,
I,
maybe
yeah,
we could all come together in
yeah.
another, okay,
I was
excellent.
looking for a creative way to be able to tell this story with Jason's help.
Absolutely, and we can work with Jason offline.
Yeah.
Jason, I do want to let everybody else know we are at 3:46. We had intended to start our Q&A at this point in time. However, I know that there's at least 2 more areas we need to touch base on. Jason, do you think we can touch base on those areas in about 3 minutes or 4 minutes time, so we could still have 10 minutes?
Yeah, absolutely. So I just wanted to hit on the employment outlook statements regionally, and say that typically what goes on process-wise is as we develop our long-term occupational projections, again, those very conservative expectations based off of long-term trends, we develop kind of a generalized statement about what this career's outlook is based off of current employment levels, the number of jobs that currently exist compared to other jobs, the overall growth rate, especially where we do see something coming out or growing. A good example of this, even though it's not as reflective of post-secondary need, is that one of the major growth areas that we are projecting right now in the 2020 to 2030 range is in leisure and hospitality. Not because of some magic boom in leisure and hospitality, but because over the short run, in the next, essentially by the end of next year, we're generally expecting most of the leisure and hospitality jobs that we lost during the pandemic to come back. In order for that to happen, as cataclysmic a cliff that employment in leisure and hospitality fell, it has to rebound significantly. And so those numbers are really ballooned out right now. By the time we get through the next cycle here later this fall for 2021, 2031 projections, most of that story will be settled down. But right now, the growth is really high there. And then we also have a generalized statement about overall openings and the overall opportunities that people have across the state. And where available, we try to describe that locally as well. To get an idea of, there's some really specific terminology of more than, less than, and to get an idea of where this number comes from, because it is region specific. If you go to this little link here called Data Sources and Limitations, it actually includes a fully documented listing for each workforce area that we have information for, specifying what range. So if I was working so I noticed, for instance, in the supplemental report in my local area, I could have an outlook statement. If you wanted to use the same language in the same way that we're doing it, you would be referring to a document like this to see if the employer council is saying it's going to grow by 14%, it's going to meet a certain criteria of phrasing, a certain language. That provides some degree of consistency of what you can expect. And so again, that resource and information for all workforce areas is right below the outlook statement. And then the last section, Cassina, was performance measures, correct? Or was that the employer database and employer information?
I think the last,
I know there's 2 sections. I just want to make sure what's more important for you.
I think the last area that we wanted to talk about was really area employment projections on here. On
Okay.
the one that you're seeing right there, that you're showing, Jason, we're
Yeah.
not seeing it at all on there. But
Mhm.
normally there would be columns in there that need to be filled out just like the above area.
Yeah, so again, typically what happens is if we have information for a given area, but due to either the presence of erroneous information, again, all of this is based off of survey research. We have a very specific standard that says that if we don't feel that the estimate is reliable and consistent enough, we're not going to show that to the public. And so we want to make sure that we're protecting essentially the quality of information that you're making decisions off of. The other thing that sometimes happens, especially when we start getting down to very specific regions and specialized occupations and careers, is that sometimes we get down to one employer. Let's say, for instance, if I was talking about, public universities, maybe I'm only going to talk about one public university in Lane County. And so when we talk about private employers, we can't do that. we have to protect the information that we're receiving from employers in the local area through a number of different state and federal confidentiality requirements. So even though we may have underlying information for it, it's not public information because of confidentiality. So because of those two reasons, we sometimes have gaps of that information. With that said, there are a couple sources of information narratively that it can describe whether or not an occupation still meets things like whether or not an occupation is high demand. So let's say, for instance, we're looking at a CNC operator. I can go to our publications tab here in this top section here and go to download publications. And we have a resource down towards the end specifically designed for most post-secondary education and CTE policymakers, as well as workforce development folks who have to deal with this language. We have our occupational employment projections listed out by area. So if I was in Lane County, I can go to my Lane high wage, high demand occupation tables and take a look at whether or not, for instance, my occupation of CNC operator meets that criteria or not. Now, it's not a specific number, but it can tell you that based off of our analysis, comparing all, some 700 occupations we might have information for in Lane County, that particular career is making more, it has more job openings over the next 10 years than at least half of the occupations. In addition to that, each publication does have a threshold indicator. So in the case of Lane County, any occupation with at least that 70 openings over the next 10 years is considered a high demand occupation. It's not it may sound like a small number, but in reality, the big number is really coming from those leisure and hospitality and retail trade occupations. For most specialized careers, I mean, if you think about physicians, we're only talking about a handful of doctors' offices filling in those gaps in a single year. We simply don't need that many job openings in some very high-end specializations. It's not that they're not vital, and we can't open that doctor's office without that physician, but we simply don't need the number in terms of magnitude. So let me do a quick.
So Jason,
yes,
I'm going to jump in and just kind of try to graciously cut in.
Yeah, that's fine.
We are at 3:54, which gives us 6 minutes left. I'd like to propose to the group, and I want to hear honestly from you, how would you feel about a part 2, where we come up with the next part of the information? We could take some FAQs that, if you would like to email them to me, and we'll do some FAQ time with you guys right now, where we can address more of these areas and get more into the weeds, so to speak, and showcase more of the items that we want to see, some of more of the resources. I want to make sure and be respectful that we only blocked 3 to 4 today. But as we learned today that labor market information, occupational profile reports and so forth are quite large. And what we have at our fingertips is a lot of information. I think erroneously, I thought 1 hour would be enough. And I stand very much corrected on that. And I certainly do apologize for thinking that. But it sounds like a few of you were okay with maybe doing a part 2. Can I see a show of hands, or can you send me an Outlook, not an Outlook, in the chat box if you would like to have a part 2 with Jason? Okay, so it sounds like we definitely would like a part 2 with you, Jason. Is that all right? Can we call you our hero and have you back for a second round?
I'd be glad to provide any additional information. The other thing that, as an option and supplement to that, is that we did talk earlier at the start that we have regional subject matter experts who are designated to cover various parts of the state. And so some of the supplemental information I'll send to Christina, and she can distribute it out, that we actually prepared recently for the high school CTE coordinators, includes listing and contact information for our regional experts. So, It's good to have an overview of all of the occupational profile tools, but if you can do it in real time with specific test cases or what you're working on, these folks can really help work through the weeds and fill in those gaps as we've talked about.
Excellent. I think we're looking at seeing some of those resources that you and I had talked about and seeing where they exist on the site as well.
Mhm.
Does anybody have any, I know we only have 4 minutes left, but Susan, did you have more questions? Lewis? I thought I saw your hand up.
No, I was agreeing
Okay.
with this part two, and
Okay.
I'm sort of interested in the smaller number issue.
Okay.
Out here in the gorge, we don't have as many employers, and they're spread around in quite a wide area, so we don't necessarily, we're not out there researching Sherman County often, but
Oh, why not, Susan?
Sherman and Gillum, and we just don't have the numbers that you have in the metro area. So
I agree, and I see, and I was just gonna say that, and then Annette just chimed in that, yeah, Klamath has the same problem. I'm thinking Rogue does as well, and some of our smaller communities. Okay, so I wrote that down. Anybody else have any questions that we can answer either right now, or if you do have some questions, please feel free to send them to me, or you talk to your colleagues and they have some questions. And then Jason and I can put those together and he can let me know, hey, this is something that they should probably talk to their regional CTE, not the CTE, the regional economist, or this is something we could definitely go over in part 2.
Absolutely.
Tammy's got her hand up.
Tammy, sorry, I didn't see you with
That's
the hand
okay.
up. There she is.
I
There's
am.
Tammy.
I don't know if this is for right now, maybe this is for part 2, but I'm wondering, in the area in those reports where it says what the educational providers are, how the information gets put on, because Lane has had a CNC program for quite a while and it's not there. And then someone else pointed out our addiction studies isn't listed under the substance abuse category. And I don't know to what extent, like, or how that gets figured out. But if we could add that to the list, just so that if there is a way to monitor it or share information when we find those inconsistencies, that would be great.
Ooh, I like that, Jason.
Yeah, thank you, Tammy. Just briefly, the information that you're seeing on the website comes from the U.S. Department of Education's National Center for Education Statistics. When community colleges and universities report to the National Clearinghouse, they report completers, effectively the number of awards by various CIP code. And each CIP code, based off of a crosswalk developed by the U.S. Department of Education, is tied to one of our occupations. Sometimes. It's sometimes the case that there's actually a mismatch. So a program has been assigned a CIP code that, based off of the national crosswalk, simply does not tie to the occupation. Unfortunately, we don't have the resources, staffing, or the time frame and funding to supplement that crosswalk. So effectively, what we have on our website, because it's a nationally sourced crosswalk, is what we're kind of stuck with. So that's one. Two is that sometimes I have had universities and community colleges contact me and find out down the stream that even though they have a specialized CIP, by the time it gets reported to the National Clearinghouse, it's been grouped with somebody else, another program. And so all of a sudden, those completers disappear off of the grid effectively. So even if I did have a national crosswalk, I have seen circumstances where they're actually being reported in another group of programs to study. So there's a couple different reasons that could be going on.
Okay, interesting.
All right, you guys, we are at 4 o'clock. I would like to take this moment to thank each and every one of you for attending today. I look forward to receiving some of your questions so that we can help formulate or structure our next time with you in a way that's the most beneficial. And I'd also like to thank Jason for your expertise and for your willingness to work with us to better understand qualityinfo.org and all the wonderful data that you have available to us that we just need to know how to find so we can dive on in and use it.
Glad to help.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody. Have a great afternoon and stay cool.